The galaxy burned beneath a dying light. Stars that had once shone as beacons of creation now wept their final embers into the void, their brilliance dimmed by the scars of 10,000 years of war. Planets hung silent and lifeless, their surfaces cracked like ancient bones, their oceans boiled away into vapor. And in the infinite black between these tombs of worlds, the whispers of chaos drifted like a plague, carrying the promise of damnation to any who dared listen. There are names in this galaxy that command fear, but one name moves like a shadow across the minds of every mortal, every warrior, and even the immortal lords of the warp, Abaddon. To some, he is a destroyer. To others, he is a liberator. But to all, he is inevitability, a tide of ruin that has struck again and again, never ceasing, never tiring. And my friends, before we begin this story, I want you to know something. Here, in this moment, I truly care for you. I am glad you are here. This is a story heavy with war, betrayal, and the slow march toward ruin. But you are safe with me as we walk these halls of history together. So before we descend into this saga, tell me, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee, and let us begin. Abaddon the Despoiler was not born in shadow. Once he walked as the first captain of the Lunar Wolves, the right hand of Horus Lupercal, the greatest of the Emperor's sons. He was the unbreakable blade of the Legion, the voice of loyalty in times of doubt. When Horus rose, Abaddon rose beside him. When Horus fell, it was Abaddon who carried the shame of his father's defeat across the stars. The heresy had ended, but the wound it left in Abaddon's soul never closed. In the shattered aftermath of the traitor Legion's retreat, he wandered among the broken remnants of his brothers, watching their unity rot into madness and their loyalty curdle into servitude to the dark gods. The sons of Horus became a husk of their former glory, scavenging like carrion beasts in the eye of terror. Abaddon looked upon them and felt only disgust. He had once believed in the Imperium as he had believed in Horus, but the Imperium he had fought to create was a lie, a rotting corpse empire sustained by fear, ignorance, and sacrifice without end. Horus's rebellion had failed, but the truth behind it still burned within Abaddon like a forge. The galaxy had not changed. It had only chained itself more tightly to the Emperor's golden throne. In the warp-wreathed fortress of the vengeful spirit, Abaddon walked the rusted halls, haunted by visions of the past. He heard the laughter of demons echoing through the steel. His brothers, once proud captains, now groveled before the powers, their minds twisted, their purpose lost. Abaddon refused to kneel. If Horus had been the weapon of the War Master's vision, then Abaddon would become the weapon of the Long War. But he was not without doubt. Even in his defiance, shadows of hesitation lingered. Was his path truly his own? Or had the whispers of the gods already coiled themselves around his heart, guiding his fury for their own ends? He looked upon the Eye of Terror, its writhing storms of madness, its planets torn apart by impossible forces, and saw both the forge of his destiny and the prison of his fate. He would need more than strength to defy both the Imperium and the gods. He would need an army. He would need unity. He would need to become more than Abaddon, more than the first captain. He would need to become the despoiler. And so, in the hidden corners of the eye, he began to weave his web. Among the shattered legions, he spoke with fire in his voice, reminding them of their shared glory, their shared hatred, and their shared enemy. He promised them not servitude, but purpose, not worship, but vengeance. He would not bow to the gods. He would use them. Outside, the galaxy still turned. The Imperium fought its eternal wars, blind to the storm building in the dark. In the silence of the void, beneath dying stars, the first threads of the Black Legion were spun. Abaddon stood at the prow of the vengeful spirit, the stormlight of the Eye of Terror, bathing his armor in shades of gold and shadow. His gaze swept across the void, toward the realm of man. His voice was quiet, almost reverent, as he spoke words that would herald 10,000 years of war. This galaxy is not enough. We will take it all, or we will see it burn. In that moment, the seed of the first Black Crusade took root, and so begins the long war. The Eye of Terror was more than a prison for the traitor legions. It was a crucible. Within its impossible storms of time and madness, centuries could pass in a heartbeat, or moments could stretch into millennia. Planets shifted in position like wandering beasts, demonic moons drifted on tides of unreality, and the laws of reason bent to the will of the dark gods. For those who dwelled here, existence was a constant battle to remain whole in body and mind. Abaddon moved through this realm as one who had seen its heart and survived. The others, warbands, champions, demon princes, looked to him with a mixture of awe and hatred. For all his defiance of the gods, none could deny that he carried the authority of a leader. He was the last echo of the War Master's vision, the living embodiment of the Legion's unbroken will. But his own thoughts were far from unshaken. Alone in the darkened strategium of the vengeful spirit, he often found himself replaying the days of the Great Crusade, the pride of the lunar wolves, the trust of his brothers, the voice of Horus calling him brother. These memories were a double-edged blade, both strength and torment. Horus had died, and with him, the dream of a united galaxy. All that remained was the long war, a war that would have no end unless Abaddon himself forged it. He walked the halls where his brothers once stood. The armor racks were empty. Their owners either dead or twisted beyond recognition. Where once banners of victory had hung, now the walls were bare, scarred by fire and age. The ship seemed to breathe with the same wounded pride as its master. The sons of Horus were shattered. Some had pledged themselves wholly to the powers of chaos, trading their honor for demonic favor. Others had fallen into despair, becoming raiders and scavengers, their loyalty to one another replaced by survival. Abaddon could not stand to see them in such ruin. His voice became the iron that reforged them. He gathered the scattered warbands aboard the vengeful spirit, his presence commanding silence among even the most arrogant champions. He reminded them of what they had been, not broken renegades, but the Emperor's finest, the first legion to bear victory across the stars. He spoke of the Imperium not as a home to be reclaimed, but as a false idol to be shattered. His words carried more than fury, they carried promise. He would unite them, not as the sons of Horus, for that name had been poisoned by defeat, but as something new, something unbroken. The Black Legion was born not in glory, but in defiance. Its colors would not carry the memory of Horus's failure, but the warning of Abaddon's wrath. Yet unity was not so easily claimed. In the shadowed corners of the vengeful spirit, whispers of dissent stirred. Rival champions, men who had once been his brothers, now plotted to test his strength. They sought to claim leadership, to seize the Legion for themselves. The first challenge came from Calrix, a warlord who had once commanded a full company during the heresy. He confronted Abaddon before the assembled warriors of the newly named Black Legion, his voice filled with contempt. "You speak of unity, Abaddon," Calrix sneered, "but you wear no crown. Why should any of us kneel to a captain who failed to save his own war master?" The hall erupted with murmurs and growls, the air heavy with tension. Abaddon stepped forward, his eyes fixed upon Calrix. He drew no weapon. "Horus was my father," Abaddon said quietly. "I stood at his side until the last breath left his body. I carry his memory as my burden and his vision as my blade. If you think me unworthy, Calrix, test me." The duel was swift and merciless. Calrix's strength was undeniable, his blows enough to crush Ceramite. But Abaddon fought with a precision honed over centuries of war, each strike a reminder of why he had been first captain. When Calrix lay broken upon the deck, Abaddon did not kill him. Instead, he looked upon the gathered warriors and spoke. "This is not a war for one man's glory. This is the long war. If any would stand against me, they will find my hand open to take theirs in loyalty, or to crush theirs in defiance." Calrix was spared, and in that act, Abaddon proved himself more than just a warlord. He was a leader who understood that every warrior, even a rival, could serve the greater cause. In the months that followed, more warbands swore allegiance to the Black Legion. Some came seeking power, others vengeance, and some simply a place in the shadow of a cause greater than their own ambition. Abaddon accepted them all, binding them not by loyalty to the dark gods, but to the vision of the long war. Still, in the quiet hours, when the stars outside the vengeful spirit burned cold, Abaddon found himself alone with his doubts. He wondered if he was building an army for victory, or for a war that would never end. He turned his gaze toward the Imperium, knowing that the time for the first Black Crusade was approaching. The galaxy would soon remember the name Abaddon, and in the depths of the Eye of Terror, the gods themselves began to take notice. The Eye of Terror shifted like a living thing. Its colors bled across the void, from crimson seas of fire to fathomless gulfs of black, each hue a reflection of the will of the gods. The vengeful spirit sailed through these tides, as if it had grown from them, a vessel of steel and memory, cutting through the unreality of the warp. Abaddon stood alone upon the command deck, his eyes fixed on the horizon of madness. The Black Legion was growing, but unity was a fragile thing. The Eye did not breed loyalty, it bred ambition, hunger, and treachery. He had seen warbands rise in glory and burn in betrayal within the span of days. If the Black Legion was to survive, he would have to temper it in a way none had done before. And so Abaddon left the relative safety of his flagship, venturing deep into the Eye itself. His journey was both physical and spiritual, a trial in which every step could lead to damnation. The first trial came upon the demon world of Uralon, a planet that bled rivers of molten brass beneath skies of screaming faces. Here dwelt a demon prince, a relic of the heresy, who claimed to have fought at Horus's side. Abaddon sought no alliance. He sought proof. The demon, bound in a fortress of bone, tested Abaddon's will with visions of the past. Horus stood before him, alive once more, his hand extended. "You need not bear this burden alone, my son. Lay down your blade, and I will take it from you." Abaddon felt the pull of his father's voice like gravity, but he stepped forward, past the illusion, his voice iron. "You are not my father. You are a lie given shape. I carry Horus not as a master, but as a warning." The demon roared, its illusion shattered. Abaddon left Uralon with his mind unbroken, and the demon's reluctant respect earned. The second trial was not of memory, but of blood. On the shifting battlefields of the demon world Vale, 100 champions of rival warbands gathered, each claiming dominion over the Black Legion's growing territories. They demanded Abaddon submit to their will or die. The battle lasted days, a maelstrom of bolter fire, blade and sorcery. Abaddon fought with relentless precision, his armor scarred, his weapon drenched in the blood of traitor and demon alike. By the battle's end, the survivors knelt, not out of fear alone, but because they saw in Abaddon a commander who could endure what they could not. It was upon his return to the vengeful spirit that the most dangerous trial awaited, not in the form of enemy blades, but in the whispers of his own war band. In the shadowed halls, dissent festered. Some believed Abaddon's refusal to kneel to the gods was arrogance that would doom them. Others feared that the long war was nothing more than a war without end, a dream that would consume them all. The most dangerous voice among them was Torvan, a champion whose loyalty was as sharp as his ambition. He approached Abaddon in the stratagem, his tone deceptively calm. You speak of unity, but you deny the power that sustains us. The gods grant us strength. Why not accept their gifts fully? Why fight their will? Abaddon turned to him, his gaze like a drawn blade. Because gifts have chains. I will not be a slave, Torvan, not to the Imperium and not to the gods. Torvan's hand moved to his weapon, but Abaddon was faster. In a flash of steel, the champion's weapon clattered to the ground. His life spared, but his pride cut deep. This is not a war for one soul's glory, Abaddon said, his voice carrying through the chamber. This is a war to end all empires. If you cannot fight for that, then leave. The long war will outlast us all. Torvan bowed, his rebellion broken, for now. In the weeks that followed, Abaddon began to gather more than just warriors. He sought relics, artifacts of the heresy, weapons and tools that could shift the balance of the galaxy. Among them was a prize that would define his legend, the claw of Horus, torn from his father's armor, reforged to be wielded by the son who would finish what Horus began. The claw was more than a weapon. It was a symbol. When Abaddon wore it into battle, it spoke to the Black Legion in a voice louder than any oath. The long war was not a dream, but a destiny. Yet deep in the warp, the gods watched. Their laughter was not of mockery, but of amusement. Whether Abaddon knew it or not, his war served their ends as much as his own. And as the first Black Crusade loomed, the galaxy would soon feel the shadow of the despoiler. The Black Legion was no longer a dream whispered in the shadowed corners of the Eye of Terror. It was a reality, a force forged from the broken shards of 100 warbands. Each warrior carried his own scars, his own grudges, his own oaths of blood. But beneath the banner of Abaddon, their hatred was given purpose. The vengeful spirit became more than a flagship. It became the heart of the Legion. In its endless corridors, warriors trained for the war to come. Its armories groaned under the weight of ancient weapons, each one steeped in the blood of the heresy. The ship's walls still bore the marks of battles fought 10,000 years ago, but now they echoed with the sound of preparation. Abaddon walked these halls like a commander and a judge. He did not rule through fear alone, though fear was a weapon he wielded well, but through vision. The long war was not for those who sought quick victory. It was for those who could endure centuries of struggle without faltering. Among the Black Legion, some names rose higher than others. There was Igethmor, the deceiver, master of sorcery, whose counsel often straddled the line between wisdom and temptation. There was Skyrak Slaughterborn, a warlord whose thirst for battle seemed boundless. And there was Iskandar Khayon, whose loyalty to Abaddon would become both a weapon and a test. These men were not mere soldiers. They were the foundations of the Black Legion's strength. Each served for his own reasons, power, vengeance, or belief in Abaddon's cause. but none could deny the force of the first captain's will. Yet loyalty in the Eye of Terror was as fragile as glass. Rivals from outside the legion sought to undermine Abaddon's growing power. Demon princes, ancient champions of the heresy, whispered of Abaddon's arrogance, painting him as a pretender who dared to stand apart from the gods. One such rival, the demon prince Draclaw, sent word to Abaddon, a challenge to meet upon the demon world of Sirith-Kar and prove his right to lead the Black Legion. Abaddon accepted without hesitation. The vengeful spirit descended upon Sirith-Kar, a world of obsidian plains and mountains carved into the screaming visages of forgotten emperors. Draclaw awaited, his form a twisted fusion of flesh, metal, and warp fire, his voice echoing like the toll of a war bell. "You are a shadow of the War Master," Draclaw roared, his claws carving deep trenches into the blackened stone. "Your crusade is nothing but a spark to amuse the gods." Abaddon's reply was cold, deliberate, "And yet you challenge me. If I am only a spark, then you fear to see me burn." The battle was not swift. Draclaw's strength was monstrous, his power fed by the unholy currents of the warp. But Abaddon fought with precision, each blow driven by the memory of 10,000 years of betrayal. The claw of Horus tore through demonic flesh, the demon's roars echoing across the plains. When Draclaw finally fell, his form dissolving into screaming ash, Abaddon raised his voice for all to hear. "This is the fate of all who stand against the long war. I will not kneel to the gods. I will not kneel to any man. I will see the galaxy broken before I bow." The words spread like fire. The Black Legion's enemies grew cautious. The war bands within its ranks grew loyal, not because they loved Abaddon, but because they feared him and respected his strength. Back aboard the vengeful spirit, Abaddon spoke with his inner circle. The time for preparation was nearing its end. The first Black Crusade was no longer a distant ambition. It was becoming a reality. But even in this moment of strength, Abaddon felt the weight of the path ahead. The Long War was more than conquest. It was a commitment to centuries of blood, betrayal, and sacrifice. He wondered, not aloud, never aloud, if there would come a day when even his will might break. In the Eye of Terror, the gods whispered and laughed. They had seen mortals rise and fall before, but Abaddon was different. He was not their chosen, not their slave. Yet, his defiance made him dangerous, and in that danger, the gods saw possibility. Far beyond the eye, the Imperium slept in the illusion of security. It did not yet know the storm that was about to break. Abaddon stood at the prow of the vengeful spirit, looking out into the void. His voice was a whisper only the galaxy could hear. Soon, the Eye of Terror was a place of shifting loyalties, where an oath sworn today could be broken tomorrow, in the name of survival, ambition, or madness. Abaddon knew this better than any man. He had seen the Black Legion forged from the scattered sons of Horus, but forging the Legion was only the beginning. Holding it together was a war of its own. The Black Legion's banners now hung from the halls of the vengeful spirit, their black and gold colours a declaration of unity. But beneath that unity lay an ocean of rivalry. War bands that had once fought each other still glared across the mess halls. Champions measured one another with silent promises of future duels, and always the whispers of the gods encouraged ambition. Abaddon stood in the strategium, surveying the map of the Imperium. It was a galaxy of opportunity, but the Imperium was vast, its defences formidable. A single strike would not bring it to its knees. The first Black Crusade would have to be more than a raid. It would have to be a statement, a wound deep enough that the Imperium would feel it for centuries. To achieve this, Abaddon would need more than strength. He would need alliances. The first alliance came from necessity. A warlord named Varkul, the Flayer, commanded a fleet of ships that patrolled the edge of the eye. His fleet was large enough to threaten Abaddon's supply lines. Varkul would either be an ally or an enemy. Abaddon met Varkul aboard the Flayer's flagship, a monstrous vessel draped in the skins of its victims. Varkul was a brute, his armor adorned with trophies taken from loyalist and traitor alike. "You want my fleet?" Varkul growled, his voice a low thunder. "What do you offer me in return?" Abaddon's answer was as sharp as a blade. "You will not serve me, Varkul. You will serve the long war. Fight for your own glory, take your own plunder, but when the Black Legion calls, you will answer." Varkul studied him for a long moment before laughing, the sound like grinding metal. "Very well, despoiler, but betray me, and I will take your head for my prow." The alliance was uneasy, but it was enough. The second alliance came from darker paths. Agethmore, the deceiver, brought word of an ancient warband of Thousand Sons sorcerers who had knowledge of hidden warp routes through Imperial space. These routes could make the Black Crusade's strike unpredictable, bypassing fortified worlds to strike at the heart. Abaddon traveled to the world of Illithrax, a planet suspended in the warp like a frozen jewel. There he met the sorcerer lord Zorath, whose knowledge was as dangerous as his ambition. "You seek my warp routes," Zorath said, his voice like wind over a grave. "But knowledge is not free. What will you give me in return?" Abaddon's reply was measured. "I will give you war. I will give you the destruction of the Imperium that cast you out, and I will give you a place in the long war if you dare take it." Zorath smiled, his eyes alight with sorcerous fire. "Then the routes are yours, despoiler, but tread carefully. The warp hungers for all who walk its paths." With Varkul's fleet and Zorath's warp routes, the Black Crusade gained the means to strike deep into Imperial territory. Yet even as these alliances were formed, betrayal simmered within the Legion. Skyrak Slaughterborn, one of Abaddon's fiercest warlords, began to whisper that the Long War was nothing more than a vanity project. He accused Abaddon of hoarding power, of refusing to seize the gifts of the gods that could guarantee victory. The whispers reached Abaddon's ears, as all whispers did. He summoned Skyrak to the Vengeful Spirit, where the two met in the dueling halls. "You doubt me," Abaddon said, his voice calm. "I doubt your will to win," Skyrak snarled, drawing his blade. "You fight like a mortal when you could rule as a god." The duel was brutal. Skyrak's strength was immense, his strikes shaking the deck beneath them. But Abaddon fought with a precision born of centuries. The claw of Horus crushed Skyrak's weapon, then hurled him to the ground. Abaddon looked down at his fallen champion. "I will not take the gods' chains to win this war, but you will fight at my side, or you will not live to see its end." Skyrak, beaten but alive, swore his loyalty anew. These alliances and confrontations solidified the Black Legion's power. The First Black Crusade was no longer a plan. It was inevitable. In the darkness of the Strategium, Abaddon traced the path of the crusade. His voice was quiet, but every man on the bridge could feel the weight of it. "We begin soon, and the galaxy will remember." The Black Legion gathered like a storm at the edge of reality. Warbands that had once prowled the Eye of Terror in isolation now converged upon the Vengeful Spirit. Fleet after fleet arrived through the screaming tides of the warp, their hulls blackened, their prows bristling with weapons. They came for war, for vengeance, for plunder, and because Abaddon, had called. In the strategium, the map of the Imperium burned in golden light, marked with paths drawn from Zorath's sorcerous warp routes. Worlds had been chosen, not for their strength alone, but for the wound their loss would deal to the Imperium's pride. Abaddon knew he could not destroy the Imperium in a single strike, but he could scar it deeply enough that the wound would never fully heal. The bridge was filled with commanders, each a warlord in his own right. Varkul the Flayer stood at Abaddon's left, his armor scarred from countless battles. Agathmor the Deceiver lingered in the shadows, his sorcerous staff alive with whispered voices. Skyrak Slaughterborn stood silent, his recent defeat a reminder of Abaddon's authority. The Imperium will not expect a full crusade, Abaddon said, his voice carrying like a blade drawn from its sheath. They see us as fractured. They see us as weak. They will learn their mistake in fire. He traced the first strikes along the map. Our fleets will emerge along 3 fronts. Varkul, you will take the Melric route. Strike at the mining worlds. Leave them burning. Agathmor, you will take Zorath's paths to the Targossian Reach. Seize its forges. Skyrak, you will lead the vanguard through the Korath expanse. Take what you can, destroy what you cannot hold. A murmur of approval filled the room, but beneath it there was tension. The Eye of Terror was a realm of constant betrayal. These commanders were bound by Abaddon's will, but their loyalty was always conditional. Abaddon knew this and welcomed it. Loyalty born of fear and ambition was still loyalty, as long as he remained the strongest. As preparations for the crusade began, the vengeful spirits' holds filled with supplies, weapons, and prisoners to be offered as sacrifices for warp passage. Sorcerers carved runes into the ship's hulls to guide them through the tides. War engines that had slept for centuries were awakened, their machine spirits howling for blood. In the quiet of his private chamber, Abaddon stood before the claw of Horus. He had wielded it before, but now it felt heavier, as if it sensed the weight of what was to come. His reflection stared back at him from the black metal, eyes hard, face scarred, a man who carried the memory of the heresy as a wound that would never heal. For a moment, he allowed himself to remember. Horus, the War Master, had once stood as the pinnacle of what the legions could be. And yet Horus had fallen, not for lack of strength, but for lack of control. Abaddon swore silently that he would not repeat his father's mistakes. The day of departure came. The fleets of the Black Legion assembled in the void beyond the eye, their formation a living wall of steel and fire. The warp churned around them, a sea of colors beyond mortal comprehension. The bridge of the vengeful spirit was alive with activity, every officer at their post, every weapon primed. Abaddon stood at the prow, his voice rising over the roar of the engines. This is the beginning. For 10,000 years, the Imperium has clung to its false throne. We will tear it down. We will make them remember Horus's name and mine. The order was given. The warp gates opened, screaming as they swallowed the fleets whole. The Black Legion surged forward, their ships vanishing into the screaming void. In the Eye of Terror, the gods laughed. Whether in approval or in mockery, none could tell. The first Black Crusade had begun. The Black Legion erupted from the warp like a spear of black iron thrust into the heart of the Imperium. Worlds that had slept in the illusion of safety awoke to the thunder of orbital bombardment, the shriek of sirens, and the burning skies that heralded the despoiler's wrath. Abaddon's fleet struck without warning, each attack calculated for maximum devastation. The Melric mining colonies burned first, their defenses shattered under Varkul, the Flayer's relentless assault. Their ore refineries, once lifeblood for imperial shipyards, became pyres that lit the void. The survivors were few, their voices lost in the roar of fire and steel. In the Targossian Reach, Igethmor's sorcery tore open warp rifts above the forges. Demonic storms swept through the Manufactoria, twisting machines into shrieking abominations and turning their workers into vessels of chaos. The forges that once armed Imperial crusades now poured out weapons for the Black Legion. But it was in the Korath expanse that the true horror of the Black Crusade revealed itself. Skyrak Slaughterborn's vanguard descended upon the agri-world of Carxis IV. The planet's surface, a patchwork of golden fields and white cities, was trampled under black-armored boots. Cities were razed, their cathedrals defiled, their grain silos set aflame. Skyrak did not take prisoners. His warbands moved like a tide of murder, leaving nothing but silence in their wake. From the bridge of the vengeful spirit, Abaddon watched these campaigns unfold. Each report was a mark of success, but also a reminder of the greater challenge ahead. The Imperium was slow to respond, but when it did, it would come with fury. It was on the world of Ilara's Vale that Abaddon made his first personal strike. The planet was a shrine world, its surface dominated by vast cathedrals dedicated to the Emperor. Its defenses were minimal. Its strength lay in faith, not firepower. Abaddon descended upon it with the Black Legion's elite. The assault was swift. Black-clad warriors stormed the sanctums, their bolters shattering stained glass and sacred relics alike. Pilgrims fled, priests screamed prayers to a silent god. At the heart of the planet, Abaddon entered the grand basilica, its vaults echoing with hymns that turned to screams as he approached the altar. Before the Emperor's towering statue, Abaddon paused. He remembered standing before Horus, hearing the War Master speak of the Emperor as a god unworthy of worship. Now, 10,000 years later, Abaddon stood in the heart of that worship and tore it down. With the claw of Horus, he shattered the statue, the sound of breaking stone carrying like thunder across the city. "This is the truth of your god," Abaddon said, his voice echoing in the ruined basilica. "He is dust. His throne will follow." Ilara's Vale fell within days. Its destruction sent shockwaves through the Imperium, which could no longer deny that the Black Legion was united, dangerous, and led by a commander who struck with purpose. But victory carried its own dangers. In the wake of these early triumphs, Abaddon's commanders began to test their limits. Varkul demanded greater spoils. Igethmor sought more freedom to pursue his sorcery, and Skyrak's bloodlust grew beyond control. Abaddon met each challenge with calculated force. Varkul's demands were met with new targets, rich in plunder. Igethmor was allowed his sorcery, but only under Abaddon's direct oversight. Skyrak, whose excesses threatened to undermine the Crusade's discipline, was summoned before Abaddon in the Strategium. "You fight for the long war, Skyrak," Abaddon said, his voice cold. "Not for your own hunger. If you cannot remember that, I will find someone who can." Skyrak's growl was low, but he bowed his head. Even his fury could not overcome the despoiler's authority. The Black Crusade pressed on. Imperial fleets began to rally, but their response was fractured, each sector governor acting in isolation. This was the weakness Abaddon had counted on. The Imperium's size, once its greatest strength, made it slow to move and slower to unite. From the command deck of the Vengeful Spirit, Abaddon traced the next wave of strikes. The first phase of the crusade had succeeded. Now the real war would begin. In the depths of the warp, the gods whispered. Abaddon ignored them, his eyes fixed on the burning worlds ahead. The first wave of the Black Crusade had struck like lightning, but Abaddon knew the second wave would be harder. The Imperium, slow though it was, had begun to stir. Astropathic distress calls screamed across the stars, summoning Imperial fleets, Space Marine chapters, and countless regiments of the Astra Militarum to meet the threat. The despoiler welcomed it. A weak enemy was no test of the Black Legion's strength. Imperial forces first struck back at Carxis IV, where Skyrack Slaughterborn's warbands still lingered among the ruins. The Imperial Fist's successor, chapter, the Iron Castellans, descended upon the world with orbital precision strikes, their drop pods tearing through the skies like burning meteors. Skyrack's warriors, unwilling to retreat, met them with savage defiance. Abaddon received the reports on the vengeful spirit. The battle was brutal, but it served his purpose. Skyrack's rage drew the Imperials deeper into the trap, their focus on a single world, while the rest of the crusade moved unopposed. In the Targossian Reach, Igethmor the Deceiver opened a new front. His sorcerers unleashed warp storms across the sector, isolating Imperial fleets and severing communication between worlds. Entire systems were left blind, their defenses paralyzed. On the Maelric front, Varkul's fleet turned from raiding to destruction. Imperial patrols that attempted to regroup were ambushed and annihilated. Each battle was brutal and swift, leaving the survivors with only fragments of horror to carry back to their commanders. Abaddon himself chose his next target carefully. His eye fell upon the fortress world of Halos Reach, a bastion on the fringe of the Segmentum Obscurus. Its void shields were formidable, its fortresses vast, and its defenders proud. The despoiler did not come to break Halos Reach by force alone. He came to humiliate it. The Black Legion's fleets emerged from the warp, their black prows blotting out the stars. The planet's defense grid opened fire immediately, its guns blazing against the void. Abaddon's reply was patient. His fleets formed a wall, absorbing the first waves of fire before sending his attack wings forward. But while the defenders fought the fleets in orbit, Abaddon launched a ground assault in an unexpected sector, a continent believed safe from attack. Using Zorath's warp routes, he translated an entire strike force directly into the fortress's rear flank. The battle was chaos. Halos Reach's defenders found themselves fighting on two fronts at once, their formations broken by the sudden appearance of Black Legion forces deep within their lines. The defenders fought bravely, but the psychological blow was as devastating as the physical one. In the fortress command spire, Abaddon cut down the planetary governor himself, his voice echoing over the vox. Halos Reach has fallen. The Imperium's walls are nothing, its shields are nothing, only the long war is eternal. The fall of Halos Reach sent shockwaves through the Imperium. Entire sectors began to divert resources to defend worlds previously thought secure. Abaddon's strategy was working. The Imperium was being forced to overextend, leaving its heart more vulnerable. Yet victory did not come without cost. The Black Crusade was stretching itself thin. Supplies were harder to maintain. Fleets were suffering damage, and rival warbands within the Legion were growing restless. In the aftermath of Halos Reach, Varkul demanded a greater share of plunder, while Igethmor's sorcery began to bleed dangerously into the warp, drawing demonic attention that risked the Crusade's stability. Skyrack's losses at Carxis IV left his warbands reduced, but his temper no less dangerous. Abaddon addressed his commanders aboard the Vengeful Spirit. "This is not a war of one battle," he reminded them. "This is a war of centuries. You will have your spoils, but you will have them when the Imperium lies in ruins, not before." His voice silenced them, but the tension remained. The Black Legion was united in war, but unity was always a blade's edge away from breaking. Still, the crusade pressed on. The Imperium's fleets began to regroup, preparing for a counterstrike. Abaddon's next move would decide whether the First Black Crusade became a lasting wound or a failed raid. In the eye of terror, the gods whispered, their voices faint and mocking. Abaddon ignored them. His eyes were fixed on the next target, deeper still into Imperial space. The Black Crusade had carved its mark into Imperial history. Worlds burned, fleets scattered, and the proud fortress of Halo's Reach lay in ruins. But Abaddon knew the Imperium's true strength had yet to be unleashed. The Imperium did not endure for 10,000 years without learning to bleed and still fight. The counterattack began with the arrival of the Imperial Navy's battle group Solstice, supported by the Crimson Castellan's Space Marine chapter. They emerged into the Targossian Reach with precision, their ships forming a wall of adamantium and fire. Igethmor's sorcerers had sown chaos across the sector, but even the warp could not keep the Imperium's will at bay forever. The Crimson Castellans descended upon the forge world of Valis Morn, intent on cutting off the Black Legion's supply of weapons. Abaddon received word of the attack aboard the Vengeful Spirit. He knew that if Valis Morn fell, the Crusade's momentum would falter, but to defend it openly would expose his fleets. He chose a third path, a trap. He ordered Igethmor to feign retreat, drawing the Castellans into the planet's heart. At the same time, Abaddon took the Justarin, his elite Terminators, through the warp to emerge directly behind the enemy lines. The battle was swift and brutal. The Crimson Castellans found themselves caught between Igethmor's sorcerers and Abaddon's Terminators. The Forge world became a furnace of slaughter, its air thick with ash and promethium fire. In the heart of the battle, Abaddon faced the Castellan's chapter master, Darnath Kairos. The duel was fierce, Kairos wielding a relic blade of his chapter, its strikes swift and precise. But Abaddon's claw shattered the blade in a single blow, the claws tearing through ceramite and flesh alike. As Kairos fell, Abaddon's voice carried over the vox. Your Emperor's strength lies in the faith of fools. Faith burns, and I am the fire. The defeat of the Crimson Castellans broke the back of the Imperium's counterattack in the Targossian Reach. Valis Morn remained in Black Legion hands, its forges continuing to supply weapons for the Crusade. But the victory came at a cost. The warp storms Igethmor had conjured to seal the trap raged out of control. Trade and communication routes between the Black Legion's fleets became erratic. Some warbands were stranded for weeks, others vanished into the warp entirely. Tensions began to rise again. Varkul accused Igethmor of sabotaging the crusade with his reckless sorcery. Skyrak, still nursing his losses from Carxus IV, demanded fresh conquests to restore his warband's strength. Abaddon summoned his commanders to the Strategium. The chamber was heavy with the weight of their ambition, the air thick with unspoken threats. You think this crusade is a feast where you take what you want? Abaddon said, his voice a cold growl. It is not. It is a blade. And if you fight over it, you will cut yourselves apart before the Imperium ever strikes you. His words silenced them, but only for now. Abaddon knew that the unity of the Black Legion was always fragile, but he also knew that as long as he remained the strongest, that unity would hold. Reports from the Maelric front arrived soon after. Varkul's fleets had smashed another Imperial convoy, but Imperial reinforcements were on their way. The enemy was adapting. The Crusade's advantage of surprise was ending. Abaddon stood before the map of the Imperium. His eyes traced the burning worlds, the broken defenses. The first phase of the Black Crusade had succeeded, but the second phase would decide whether the war became a lasting wound or a memory. He gave his orders. The next strike would be deeper, aimed not just at worlds, but at the Imperium's very heart. In the warp, the gods whispered. Their laughter was closer now. The warp was a shifting sea, and Abaddon sailed it like a master navigator. The first Black Crusade had been chaos for the Imperium, but for the Black Legion, it was a carefully orchestrated storm. Every strike had been chosen, every retreat calculated. Now, Abaddon turned his gaze toward a prize greater than any world or fortress. His target was the shrine world of Cathar Prime, a bastion of faith and supply lines that fed multiple segmentum fleets. It was more than a religious symbol, it was a strategic artery. Cut it, and the surrounding sectors would bleed. Cathar Prime was defended by an orbital ring of defense stations, hundreds of voidcraft, and the full strength of the Palatine Guard, a regiment renowned for their discipline and loyalty. But Abaddon was not coming to storm it in brute force. He came to break it from within. Igethmore and his sorcerers opened the path. Through the warp, they wove illusions and false signals, sending the defenders into a spiral of confusion. Vox channels crackled with false orders, sensors displayed phantom fleets, and the planetary commanders scrambled to reposition forces that no longer existed. While the planet's defenses reeled, the Black Legion struck. Varkul's fleets emerged on the far side of the system, drawing the defenders into battle. As the orbital stations rotated toward the false threat, Abaddon's own fleet translated directly above Cathar Prime. The vengeful spirit's guns opened fire, tearing the orbital defenses apart in minutes. Drop pods screamed through the atmosphere, delivering waves of Black Legionnaires into the heart of the Shrine World. The Palatine Guard fought with unwavering faith. Streets became fortresses, every square fought for with blood. But faith alone could not match the experience of 10,000 years of war. Abaddon led the assault on the Sanctum Spire, the tallest cathedral in the city and the seat of the planet's cardinal prelate. Inside, the air reeked of incense and blood. Choirs sang hymns that turned into screams as the Black Legion tore through the sanctum. The cardinal prelate, resplendent in golden vestments, stood before the altar, holding aloft the emperor's aquila. His voice rang with defiance. "You will find no victory here, Abaddon. This world stands in his light." Abaddon's voice was cold, a shadow over the cardinal's flame. "Your light is a dying star. I am the night that swallows it." The claw of Horus struck, the aquila shattering along with the cardinal's life. With the death of the cardinal, the morale of the Palatine Guard broke. The defenders were slaughtered or scattered, and Cathar Prime burned. Its cathedrals fell one by one, their relics defiled, their treasures claimed for the long war. The fall of Cathar Prime sent ripples of despair through the segmentum. Pilgrims' routes collapsed, faith wavered, and imperial supply lines were thrown into disarray. But the victory came with a shadow. The Black Legion's fleets, spread across multiple fronts, were now deep in imperial space. Supply was becoming increasingly precarious. The warp storms Igethmore had summoned months before were now a hindrance, isolating warbands and cutting them off from coordinated movement. Varkul demanded a withdrawal to consolidate their spoils. Skyrak, still eager for blood, demanded they push deeper. Igethmore remained silent, though his eyes glowed with the knowledge of dangers yet to come. Abaddon listened, his expression as unreadable as the void. He knew both paths carried risk. Retreat too soon, and the crusade would lose its momentum. Push too far, and the Imperium's counterattack could trap them. At last he spoke. "This war is not measured in single victories. It is measured in scars. We will leave Cathar Prime behind, but we do not retreat. We will strike again and again until the Imperium drowns in its own blood. The orders were given. The Black Legion began to shift its fleets toward new targets. The crusade was not ending. It was evolving. In the warp, the gods whispered more clearly now. Abaddon ignored them still, though their laughter lingered. The fires of Cathar Prime still burned in Abaddon's memory when the next phase of the crusade began. The Black Legion had left the shrine world behind, but its fall was a wound that continued to bleed across the segmentum. Imperial fleets diverted to protect other pilgrimage routes, weakening sectors that had once been strong. Abaddon exploited this weakness. His next strike would be at the Imperial world of Drakenhold, a fortress planet on the edge of the Orphean corridor. Unlike Cathar Prime, Drakenhold was not a shrine. It was a military citadel, built to defend against incursions from the eye. If it fell, the Imperium's defenses in the region would collapse. Drakenhold was defended by bastions carved into black mountains, shielded by overlapping void barriers and bristling with macro cannons. The planet had never fallen to an external attack, but Abaddon had no intention of attacking it in a way it expected. He sent Varkul's fleets on a wide arc, drawing Drakenhold's orbital defenses toward the outer edges of the system. At the same time, Igethmor's sorcerers began weaving a storm across the warp lanes leading to the planet, isolating it from reinforcement. Abaddon himself arrived in the shadow of the storm, translating into orbit with a strike force of Terminators, Raptors, and Elite Chosen. His forces descended on the planet's lesser bastions first, cutting off supply depots and relay stations that fed the main fortress. The defenders fought with desperate discipline. The Iron Talon's Astra Militarum regiment held the passes, their tanks roaring through the valleys while the fortress artillery thundered from above. But Abaddon's assault was relentless. The Black Legion cut through the Iron Talon's lines with bolter fire and chain blades, the mountains echoing with the screams of dying men. At the heart of the battle stood Bastion Primus, the largest of Drakenhold's fortresses. Its gates were said to be unbreakable. Abaddon did not waste time testing them. He brought the claw of Horus to bear, tearing through the armored gates as if they were parchment. Inside, the defenders fought room by room, corridor by corridor. The air was thick with the stink of promethium, blood, and burning metal. At the command spire, Abaddon met Lord Commander Hestian, the man charged with Drakenhold's defense. Hestian stood firm, his power sword raised, his voice defiant. "You will not pass, despoiler. This fortress has stood for centuries. It will not fall to you." Abaddon's reply was cold. "It stood for centuries because I allowed it. That ends today." The duel was short and brutal. Hestian's skill was nothing compared to the sheer power of the War Master's heir. The claw of Horus ended his life in a single crushing blow. With Hestian's death, Bastion Primus fell. The remaining fortresses surrendered or were overrun within days. Drakenhold's defenses were broken, its banners replaced with the black and gold of the Legion. The fall of Drakenhold sent panic through the Orphean corridor. Worlds that had once been secure now stood exposed, and the Imperium began scrambling to shore up its defenses. But the victory carried weight within the Black Legion as well. Varkul pressed again for consolidation, arguing that their forces were stretched thin. Skyrak, ever thirsty for more blood, saw the path open toward even greater conquests. Igethmor's silence was more troubling than either. The sorcerer's gaze lingered on the warp storms he had summoned, as if he could hear voices whispering from within. In the strategium of the vengeful spirit, Abaddon listened. He weighed their counsel, then spoke with finality. We do not stop. Every victory weakens the Imperium and strengthens our name. The long war is not won by hesitation. The orders were given. The Black Crusade would push deeper. In the warp, the gods' whispers were no longer faint. They were close, insistent, as though waiting for a choice Abaddon had not yet made. The Black Crusade surged deeper into Imperial space. The fall of Drakenhold had cracked the Orphean corridor wide open, and panic spread across the segmentum like wildfire. Governors fortified their worlds, generals pulled troops from distant sectors, and the Emperor's servants sent desperate pleas to Terra. Abaddon knew the Imperium could not respond everywhere at once. This was the moment to strike where it would hurt most, not with brute force, but with precision. His eye fell upon the forge world of Helbrecht Sigma. Helbrecht Sigma was not simply a factory world. It was a linchpin of imperial logistics, its manufactoria producing weapons, munitions, and armor for dozens of nearby systems. Destroying it would cripple the sector's defenses. But Abaddon saw a greater opportunity, to take it intact and turn its forges to the long war. The plan was ambitious. The planet's defenses were formidable. Orbital platforms armed with plasma batteries, legions of Skitari and Titan Legios standing in its defense. But Abaddon's strategy was not to overwhelm them head-on. Igethmor the Deceiver began the assault in the warp. His sorcerers seeded the noosphere with false data, causing the planet's machine spirits to misfire. Defense turrets turned on empty space. Titan engines locked down, and Vox channels filled with corrupted prayers. While confusion spread, Varkul's fleets launched a feint, drawing the defenders' attention to the planet's outer orbit. As they committed to the false threat, the vengeful spirit translated into a shadowed region of space, delivering Abaddon's strike force directly into the lower Manufactoria districts. The battle in the streets of Helbrecht Sigma was unlike the brutal sieges before. It was a war fought in steel corridors, foundries, and underhive tunnels. The Skitari fought with mechanical precision, their ranks advancing through withering bolter fire. Servitor gunners rained shells into choke points, turning the Manufactoria into killing fields. But the Black Legion advanced. Terminators tore through Skitari ranks, Raptors struck from above, and Havocs brought down entire gantries with concentrated fire. Abaddon himself strode through the heart of the battle, the claw of Horus carving a path toward the planet's command forge. Within the forge temple, Archmagos Dominus Helvar stood waiting. His voice was a cold metallic whisper. "You are an error in the data, Abaddon, and all errors must be purged." Abaddon's reply was a low growl. "The Imperium's machine is breaking. I am the hand that tears it apart." Their clash was brutal. Blade against power axe, ancient armor against arcane shielding. Sparks and blood filled the forge. At last, Abaddon's claw crushed the Dominus core, silencing his mechanical voice forever. With the Archmagos dead, Helbrecht Sigma's defenses collapsed. The Titans fell silent, their command protocols disrupted. The forges were claimed in the name of the Long War. The victory was immense. Helbrecht Sigma's Manufactoria now supplied the Black Legion's fleets, churning out weapons at a rate unmatched by any conquered world before. But the conquest came with growing tension. Varkul demanded they consolidate their holdings to protect the forges. Skyrak called for more conquests, eager to ride the momentum. Igethmor remained enigmatic, his gaze fixed on the warp storms surrounding their route of retreat. In the Strategium, Abaddon stood before the map of the Imperium. His crusade had burned worlds, broken fortresses, and captured forges. But each victory pushed him deeper into enemy space. The Imperium's counterattack would come soon, and it would come hard. Still, Abaddon gave the order. We do not turn back. The long war is not won by retreat. We will strike again, deeper, harder, until the Imperium has no breath left to resist. In the warp, the gods' whispers were no longer patient. They pressed closer, as though sensing the moment when their chosen champion must decide how far he would go. Helbrecht Sigma's forges burned with new purpose. Black-armored artificers worked beside twisted tech adepts, reshaping the planet's industry for the long war. But Abaddon knew this victory had drawn every Imperial eye in the region. His crusade was no longer a shadow striking at the edges. It was a black spear driven into the Imperium's chest. The counterattack came swiftly. Segmentum Command assembled a coalition fleet under Lord Admiral Soren Vera, reinforced by the Fire Lord's Space Marine chapter and multiple Astra Militarum regiments. Their goal was not to retake every lost world. It was to cut off the Black Crusade's supply lines and trap the Legion deep in hostile space. Vera's fleet moved with rare precision for the Imperium, striking at the Maelric route to sever Varkul's line of retreat. Meanwhile, the Fire Lords descended upon the outposts guarding the Orphean corridor, burning them in righteous flame. Abaddon received the reports aboard the Vengeful Spirit. His expression remained unreadable. This was the response he had expected, and he had prepared for it. Ugethmor's sorcerers expanded the warp storms already swirling along the Black Legion's routes, creating labyrinthine paths that Imperial navigators dared not enter. Varkul was ordered to abandon weaker positions, drawing the enemy deeper into the trap. The trap was sprung at the world of Nastrad IV. Imperial forces believed it a staging ground for the Black Legion's next advance, but when they arrived, they found only abandoned fortifications. As the Imperial fleet established orbit, the warp screamed. From the void emerged the Black Legion's main fleet, led by the Vengeful Spirit. Abaddon's ships struck from multiple vectors, cutting through the Imperial formation with precision. The battle turned into a slaughter. On the surface, Skyrak Slaughterborn led his warbands in a furious counterstrike against the Fire Lords. The fighting was brutal, flame against chainaxe, bolter against bolter. Skyrak's warriors were driven by a thirst for vengeance after years of costly battles. Abaddon himself descended into the heart of the battle, confronting the Fire Lord's chapter master, Vael Oric. The Fire Lord fought with the fury of a burning star, his blade wreathed in flame. But Abaddon's power was relentless. The claw of Horus tore through Oric's armor, ending the duel with brutal finality. With their commander dead, the Fire Lords withdrew, their remaining forces falling back to regroup with the Imperial fleet. Vera's grand counterattack collapsed into chaos. Yet victory was costly. The Black Legion's ships had suffered heavy damage, and several warbands had been lost in the warp storms Ugethmor had unleashed. Supplies were dwindling. Even Helbrecht Sigma's forges could not sustain the crusade indefinitely, while deep in enemy space. In the Strategium, Varkul pressed again for consolidation. Skyrak demanded they push forward to capitalize on the enemy's defeat. Ugethmor's silence was now a constant weight in the chamber, his eyes fixed on some unseen horizon. Abaddon listened. He weighed the risks, and for the first time since the crusade began, a shadow of caution touched his voice. We hold what we have taken. The long war will not be won by one crusade. We will bleed the Imperium today so that we may kill it tomorrow. The crusade's pace slowed. The Black Legion shifted to fortified positions, preparing for the inevitable Imperial retaliation. In the warp, the gods' voices were insistent now, urging Abaddon toward decisions that could change the course of the war and his fate. The victory at Helbrecht Sigma had given the Black Legion a prize beyond measure. Its forges burned day and night, feeding weapons into the Crusades' fleets. But Abaddon knew that such a prize could not be held without drawing the full fury of the Imperium. That fury came sooner than expected. Imperial High Command, alarmed by the rapid collapse of the Orphean Corridor, assembled a massive relief force. Led by Lord Admiral Soren Vera, the coalition fleet included several Space Marine chapters, including the Fire Lords, and countless Imperial Navy squadrons. Their goal was simple: cut the Black Crusade off from its supply lines and trap Abaddon deep within Imperial space. Reports from scattered warbands told the same story. Imperial fleets were burning back systems along the Maelric route. The Fire Lords struck at the outposts guarding the corridor, purging them in flame. Abaddon stood over the Strategium's hololith aboard the Vengeful Spirit, studying the movements with his cold, golden gaze. This was not the reckless flailing of desperate governors. This was a coordinated strike planned to box him in. He smiled. It was exactly what he wanted. Igethmor's sorcerers had already been weaving the warp storms along the Black Legion's routes of retreat, turning safe passage into a shifting maze of danger. Now, Abaddon ordered them to thicken the storms, sealing pathways behind the advancing Imperial fleet. At the same time, Varkul was ordered to abandon weaker positions deliberately, retreating deeper into the trap. Imperial commanders, seeing what appeared to be a crumbling crusade, pressed forward with greater haste. The baited hook was set at the world of Nastrad IV. Imperial intelligence identified it as the primary staging ground for the next phase of Abaddon's offensive. When Admiral Vera's fleet arrived, they found the planet seemingly abandoned. And then the warp screamed. The Vengeful Spirit and the Black Legion's core fleet emerged from the void, cutting into the Imperial formation from multiple vectors. Macro cannon fire ripped through ship hulls. Boarding torpedoes slammed into Imperial cruisers. And in the confusion, Abaddon's forces seized control of the void. On the surface of Nastrad IV, Skyrak Slaughterborn led his warbands in a furious ambush against the Fire Lords. The battle was savage, chain axes clashing against burning blades, bolter fire ripping through the ash-choked air. Abaddon descended into the heart of the battle, confronting the Fire Lord's chapter master, Viel Oric. Oric's strike was like a burning star, his blade wreathed in purging flame. But Abaddon's strength was relentless. The claw of Horus crushed Oric's defenses, shattering his armor in a single brutal blow. With their chapter master dead, the Fire Lords withdrew, their surviving forces retreating toward orbit. Vera's coalition fleet, bleeding and scattered, fell back in disarray. The Black Legion had won a decisive victory. The trap had sprung perfectly, but the victory came with a price. The Legion's ships bore deep wounds from the battle, and many warbands had been lost in the warp storms Igethmor had unleashed. Supplies were dwindling, even with Helbrecht Sigma's forges working at full capacity. In the Strategium, the tension was palpable. Varkul argued for consolidation. Skyrak demanded they press forward, riding the momentum of their victory. Igethmor, as always, stood silent, his eyes fixed on something beyond the war, as if listening to voices no one else could hear. Abaddon's voice cut through the chamber. This crusade has bled the Imperium. That is enough for now. The long war will not be won by one battle or one campaign. We will strike again when the blade is sharp, not when it is dulled by excess. The Crusade's advance slowed. The Black Legion began to fortify its gains, preparing for the inevitable Imperial retaliation. In the warp, the gods' whispers grew louder, pressing in on the despoiler, urging choices that could shape the destiny of the long war. The Black Crusade had carved its mark into the Imperium's flesh, but now the wound was beginning to clot. Imperial fleets, battered yet unbroken, regrouped along fortified lines. Every world Abaddon had taken now stood isolated, surrounded by a sea of hostile stars. For months, the Black Legion consolidated its holdings. Helbrecht Sigma churned out weapons day and night, its forges now bent to the will of the Long War. Drakkenhold's bastions became anchor points for the Crusade's fleets, but the cost of holding these prizes was growing. Agathmor's warp storms, once a weapon to isolate Imperial forces, now snarled the Black Legion's own supply lines. Varkul's fleet struggled to maintain cohesion. Skyrack's warbands, idle for too long, began turning their rage on one another. Abaddon understood the danger. The Black Legion was strongest when its enemies were united against the Imperium, not when its strength turned inward. He needed a decisive action to maintain momentum, something that would both secure the Crusade's gains and remind the Legion why they followed him. His gaze fell upon Carrion's Gate. Carrion's Gate was not a world, but a fortified warp route, a nexus of stable corridors that connected multiple sectors. It was guarded by a massive Imperial battle station, the Bastion Eternal, and supported by fleets from 3 segmentum commands. Controlling the gate would grant Abaddon free movement in the region and cut off Imperial reinforcements entirely. The assault was a gamble. The Bastion Eternal was one of the most heavily defended void fortresses in the segmentum, but Abaddon's strategy was not to engage it directly. Varkul's fleets launched diversionary raids across neighboring systems, forcing Imperial ships to scatter. Igethmor, working deep within the warp, disrupted astropathic signals, delaying reinforcements. The vengeful spirit translated into real space at the edge of the gate, accompanied by a core strike fleet. Under cover of the warp storms, the Black Legion's ships advanced, their black hulls cutting through the void like silent predators. The battle began with surgical strikes. Abaddon ordered concentrated fire on the Bastion's shield generators, using wave after wave of boarding torpedoes to breach its defenses. Terminators stormed the corridors, cutting through defenders with bolter and blade. The fortress's commander, Admiral Varun Holt, refused to yield. His ships fought to the last, the void around Carrion's Gate choked with burning wrecks. But Abaddon's will was inexorable. In the command deck of the Bastion Eternal, Holt faced the despoiler. "You'll gain nothing from this, Abaddon. The gate will hold, and the Imperium will crush you." Abaddon's voice was cold, almost amused. "The Imperium has been holding for 10,000 years. All I need is for it to bleed." The claw of Horus struck, ending Holt's life. With his death, resistance collapsed. The Bastion Eternal was taken, its guns turned outward, sealing Carrion's Gate for the Black Legion. The victory was monumental. Imperial reinforcements in the sector were cut off, their fleets forced to take long, dangerous warp routes. For a time, the Black Crusade had uncontested control of the corridor, but the cost was heavy. The battle had consumed resources at a rate Helbrecht Sigma could barely replace. Several warbands had been lost entirely, their names added to the growing list of sacrifices. In the Strategium, Varkul once again pressed for consolidation. Skyrack demanded the Crusade push deeper. Agathmor, his voice cold, warned of storms in the warp that even he could not predict. Abaddon listened, then gave his command. "We hold Carrion's Gate. We let the Imperium exhaust itself against its walls, and when it breaks, we will strike again." The Crusade paused, the Black Legion fortifying its new stronghold. In the warp, the gods' whispers had become a roar. The despoiler knew the final act of this crusade was drawing near. Carrion's Gate stood as a black monument to Abaddon's will. The Bastion Eternal, now draped in the banners of the Black Legion, loomed over the warp route like a predator at rest. For months, Imperial fleets battered at its defenses, only to be broken by the fortress guns and the warp storms that Igethmor wove like a shroud. The Black Crusade had stalled, but not in defeat. Every moment the gate remained in Abaddon's hands was a victory measured in Imperial blood. But the Crusade's strength was not infinite. Supplies dwindled, ships bore the scars of unending battle, and even Helbrecht Sigma's forges could not keep pace forever. Abaddon knew the moment had come. The Crusade had achieved its purpose. It had bled the Imperium, humiliated its defenders, and carved a wound into its defenses that would take decades to heal. To press further now would risk everything. In the strategium of the vengeful spirit, the despoiler stood before his warlords. Varkal, Skyrak, and Igethmor all awaited his decision. The long war is not won in a single strike, Abaddon said, his voice cold but unshaken. This crusade has taken what it came for. Now we leave the wound to fester. The Imperium will bleed long after we are gone. The decision was made. The order to withdraw was given, not in retreat, but in controlled disengagement. Warbands began to slip back into the warp, taking their spoils, their captives, and their scars with them. Carrion's Gate would not be abandoned in silence, however. As the Black Legion prepared their departure, Igethmor unleashed his final sorcery upon the Bastion Eternal. Warp fire consumed the fortress from within, turning its mighty guns to molten slag. When the last Black Legion ship translated away, Carrion's Gate was nothing but a drifting ruin, its passage sealed by the storms. Imperial records would later call it a Pyrrhic victory. The gate had been reclaimed, but the sector was in disarray. Drakkenhold lay in ruins, Helbrecht Sigma had fallen, Cathar Prime was ashes. It would take decades to rebuild, and even longer to restore morale. Aboard the vengeful spirit, Abaddon stood alone in the strategium. The maps of the Imperium burned in faint gold light, 1,000 targets yet untouched. The gods' voices pressed close, whispering promises, offering rewards for the blood he had spilled. Abaddon ignored them, as he always had. The long war was not for them. It was for his own vengeance, his own vision. He turned from the maps, his voice a low growl to the silent chamber. This is only the beginning. The Imperium will not endure forever. When it falls, it will remember my name. In the void beyond, the Black Legion vanished into the warp, their banners carried toward the next war. The Imperium, bleeding and defiant, braced for the day the despoiler would return. And return he would.